Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the Director of Rice University's Baker Institute for Public Policy, Ambassador Edward Djerejian.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's my privilege to introduce this afternoon's distinguished speaker. He has spent much of his adult life dedicated to public service, first as United States Congressman, then as Governor of Indiana, and finally as Vice President of the United States. He is an acute observer of American politics and public policy with experience at the highest levels in both. His subject today is energy security. It could not be more timely or more important. The Russian invasion of Ukraine has starkly revealed the abiding centrality of energy to economic stability and growth here and abroad. From the beginning, energy policy has been a leading element in the Baker Institute's research agenda and our programs. Just this morning, in this very hall, our Center for Energy Studies hosted an event on environment, social, and governance criteria in the energy sector. Part of our energy agenda reflects our location in Houston, the world's energy capital, but our commitment to energy policy also reflects our conviction that energy is a critical issue that encompasses economics, the environment, and not least the geopolitics of power. So we look forward to our speaker's thoughts on the central issue. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to present the Honorable Mike Pence, the 48th Vice President of the United States of America.
Well, thank you all. Thank you for that warm welcome. It's good to be back in Houston, and I want to thank Ambassador Djerejian for the hospitality as well as his great leadership and the inspiring words that he expressed today. It is an honor to be back here at Rice University's Baker Institute for Public Policy. It truly is, as those of you gathered here have helped make it so, one of the nation's premier think tanks. And of course, it's named for one of America's premier statesmen, Secretary James Baker. I'm a great admirer of Secretary James Baker, who I am told at age 93 is actually on a safari in Africa. An extraordinary man who I think deserves every bit of applause from a nation for his lifetime of service. So join me in thanking Secretary James Baker for his hospitality and his lifetime of leadership. And I'm told for 30 years, scholars and statesmen and students have gathered here at this institute, in Secretary Baker's words, to build a bridge between the world of ideas and the world of action. And that's what brings me here today to speak to all of you about energy independence. The principles and ideas you've elevated here, particularly in the area of energy, here in Houston, the energy capital of the world, I believe will shape the discourse on this vital issue in the life of our nation at an enormously important time. It's also good for me to be back. I was here when I had a day job back in 2019 as Vice President. I thought this was just the right place to come and talk about the cause of freedom all across the Western Hemisphere, and I'm delighted, Mr. Ambassador, to be back. We gather today at a time when America is facing an onslaught of left-wing policies on energy from the Biden administration that is weakening America at home and abroad. Everyday Americans are facing hardship. Inflation's at a 40-year high, and gasoline prices are the highest ever recorded. The time has come for action. The time has come to unleash American energy and restore America's power. But I came here to deliver this message because in a very real sense, Houston and all of Texas is not just the energy capital of America, but in many ways the energy capital of the world. And that's a testament to the entrepreneurial spirit here in Texas. It's also a testament to generations of Texas leaders. So let me take a moment just to pay tribute to a friend of mine, one of America's great governors and a great leader for American energy independence, Governor Greg Abbott. I'll also tell you the energy industry has always been a special place in my heart. Because I grew up in a family that ran gas stations all across southern Indiana. In fact, by the time I was old enough to wear a Marathon gas station uniform, I was running out onto the drive, pumping gas, washing windshields, and working my way through college as a gas station attendant. And for those of you under the age of 40, we'll explain later what a gas station attendant was. But going to work in what my dad used to affectionately call the oil business enshrined in my heart a special appreciation for the role that gasoline, that oil, that this industry plays in the vitality of our communities and our nation. When I was a member of Congress, I fought to expand American domestic energy production. As a governor, I championed Indiana's historic coal industry and natural gas. But I must tell you, it was a great privilege for me to be vice president in the most pro-energy administration in American history. In 2017, just months after taking office, I'm proud to report the Trump-Pence administration declared that we were going to usher in a new era of American energy independence. And in 48 months, we made America energy independent, and we made America the world's greatest energy superpower. It's extraordinary. For decades, America had lived at the mercy of foreign energy suppliers. The experts warned that our domestic resources were scarce, that the world was rapidly running out of oil, and that the only way to solve the problem was through draconian restrictions on the production and use of America's energy resources. But under the Trump-Pence administration, we saw the world differently. We recognized the truth that America had a virtually limitless supply of energy right under our feet. We recognized those resources belong not to the government, but to the American people. And we knew that if we unleashed American energy, we could create millions of jobs, unlock tremendous source of prosperity, and reclaim American sovereignty from foreign suppliers. And I'm proud to report that's exactly what we did. Under the Trump-Pence administration, we ended the war on American energy and declared our energy independence. In fact, we actually achieved American energy dominance in a short period of time. And unleashing American energy is what brings me to this forum today here at Rice University. Because all of that is under siege under the current administration. But first, a little history. Under our administration, one of our first actions was to withdraw from the one-sided Paris Climate Agreement, which actually punished American industry while allowing China to continue polluting with impunity along with other nations. We canceled the previous administration's so-called Clean Power Plan and replaced it with new affordable clean energy rules that made it possible for America's economy to continue to grow and America's energy sector to continue to expand. We approved the Keystone XL and Dakota Access pipelines, creating thousands of new jobs. We expedited approval of the New Star's New Burgos pipeline to export American gasoline to Mexico, and we opened up the Alaskan Arctic National Wildlife Refuge for the first time after literally decades of efforts on Capitol Hill to do just that. We also approved a massive expansion of liquid natural gas terminals, helping our country become one of the top LNG exporters in the world, providing true energy security to our friends and allies around the globe. And we imposed sanctions on any firm that helped build the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, being constructed to make Europe even more dependent on Russia for its energy needs, and it immediately shut the project down. Within months of unleashing American energy, our economy took off like a rocket. The U.S. became the #1 producer of oil and natural gas in the world during our 4 years. And for the first time in 70 years, the United States of America became a net exporter of energy, and our energy imports fell to the lowest level in more than half a century. That is American energy independence. with a powerful energy sector fueling economic growth. We gained more than 7 million new jobs. Household incomes soared to a new record. Unemployment plummeted to the lowest rate in 50 years, and 10 million people were lifted off of welfare, the largest poverty reduction in modern history. And the American dream was working more for every American than ever before. We had the lowest unemployment ever recorded for African Americans, the lowest unemployment ever recorded for Hispanic Americans. And it was driven by our economic policies, I believe the centerpiece of which was low-cost energy. But now the war we ended has returned with a vengeance. Now the war on energy has returned. You know, I often say that one of the great parts about no longer being vice president is I get to drive my own car. One of the worst parts is I get to pay for my own gas. I was actually visiting my daughter and my unworthy son-in-law, who's a Navy pilot in California. And I did the father-in-law thing, you know. I said, let me take your truck down to the gas station and fill it up, you know, before we leave. $6 a gallon in California. I almost had to take out a mortgage. But all kidding aside, the news this week is that the price of gasoline, the average price of gasoline is now $4.37 a gallon. That is the highest ever recorded in the history of our country, according to AAA. Now, to put that in context, think of it this way. Gas prices are higher today than they were in the financial crunch of 2008. Gas prices are higher today than during the energy crisis in the 1970s. Remember the long gas lines? And even when we were rationing gasoline during World War II, gas prices are still higher today. In California, it's more than $6 a gallon. Might be one of the reasons so many Californians are moving here to Texas. And family budgets around the country are literally being crushed by this oil-led inflation. The White House has tried to shift the blame in their explanation of why energy prices are soaring. But the American people know the truth. They call it Putin's price hike. But the truth is, gasoline prices had soared by 52% on President Biden's watch before the first shot was ever fired in Ukraine. Now, let me be clear. Vladimir Putin is responsible for the brutal Russian invasion of Ukraine, and Vladimir Putin must be held accountable. We must continue to support the Ukrainian people with arms, sanctions, and humanitarian aid. But high gas prices and inflation are not the result of the war in Ukraine. High gas prices are the result of the war on energy. And the American people know it. They know the record of this administration. They've seen it literally since day one. President Biden has bent the knee to international bureaucrats, rejoining the Paris Climate Accord. He's bowed to environmental extremists, canceling the Keystone Pipeline virtually on the first day that he took office, costing thousands of American jobs. He's virtually shut down oil and gas leases from our vast public lands, blocking the American people from using resources that really are our birthright. And after we had pulled Europe back from Nord Stream 2 long before the Russian invasion of Ukraine, this administration early on approved the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, giving Russia a vast new funding stream, even as they were preparing their brutal invasion of Ukraine. Beyond that, they've weaponized the Securities and Exchange Commission, the Federal Reserve, and other federal agencies to choke off financing for traditional energy sources through capricious new ESG regulations that allow left-wing radicals to destroy American energy producers from within. In just 1 year, President Biden has turned a surplus of American oil and gas into a deficit, all in the name of a radical environmental agenda and all at the expense of American workers and families. The result is a deep and painful economic wound that hurts all the more because it's self-inflicted. And Biden's war on energy hasn't just led to higher prices at the pump. It's led to higher heating bills for families, higher operating costs for manufacturers, and substantially higher shipping costs for millions of American businesses. Energy prices spill over into the entire economy. We now have the highest inflation in 40 years, and energy costs are the number one driver of inflation. The war on energy has also made America much more vulnerable to foreign regimes like Russia that use energy as an economic weapon. As the ambassador said, energy has a strategic role in the life of our nation and our place in the world. And the truth is, last year, the United States more than doubled its crude oil imports from Russia. Prior to the ban on Russian oil, our imports from Russia reached the highest they had been in a decade. Russia surpassed Mexico to become the second largest foreign oil supplier to the U.S. in 2021, behind only Canada, all the while as they were moving their tanks and moving their troops to the border of Ukraine. America is even now forced to consider begging the socialist dictator of Venezuela to help meet our domestic needs. And we're back to the negotiating table with Iran, literally laying a foundation for Iran in a set period of time to ultimately obtain a nuclear weapon. And worst of all, we were allowing the Russians to negotiate with Iran on our behalf. It's extraordinary to think of it, the times in which we live. All the while, the Biden administration has been strangling American production, depleting our strategic petroleum reserve in a futile attempt to stabilize oil prices was the first reaction to what they had caused in the current American energy crisis. They released 50 million barrels in November of 2021, another 30 million barrels this year. And it's done nothing whatsoever to help consumers, as every expert predicted. But it's depleted more than 15% of our strategic reserve, which exists when America faces strategic challenges for no reason whatsoever. The truth is, if this Biden-induced energy disaster continues, the American people will be vulnerable to energy blackmail from hostile states like Russia, Venezuela, and even Iran. And energy blackmail isn't a theoretical problem. It's happening in the world right now. Just a few weeks ago, Vladimir Putin threatened to cut off gas to European countries that refused to pay for gas in rubles in his attempt to circumvent sanctions imposed by the United States and the West. Germany was forced to implore its citizens to ration energy to reduce the country's dependence on Russia. The truth is, if the Biden administration has their way, America will have no choice but to grovel before our adversaries. As we hamstring American energy production, we will inevitably be forced to look to places in the world adversarial to our interests and our values to meet our energy needs. The truth is also that Biden has also installed a cabal of bureaucrats and agency heads who are working hand in glove in the private sector to make investments in traditional energy all but impossible. You know, finance was always meant to facilitate investment and spur economic growth that benefits our entire country. It's what drives our free enterprise system. But President Biden and his government regulators are weaponizing the financial system to do the exact opposite, to shut down economic growth in the energy industry in the name of environmental extremism. The president's climate envoy, John Kerry, is pressuring banks to refuse to make loans to U.S. oil and gas companies, making it virtually impossible to increase production. Liberal activist investors are forcing private companies to abide by ESG investing principles, elevating left-wing environmental, social, and corporate governance goals over the interests of the business, shareholders, or employees. I mean, look at what's happened to Exxon Mobil. an insurgent shareholder backed by BlackRock, the world's largest asset manager, has forced Exxon to put 3 environmentalists on its corporate board, and those 3 are now working to undermine the company from the inside. And states like Texas, with massive employee pension funds invested in the stock market, would be well advised to rein in these massive investment funds that are pushing a radical ESG agenda. It is time for freedom-loving states to use our resources to stand for free enterprise and American energy. We should be taking our money elsewhere. It reminds me of the anti-BDS movement in the state of Indiana, where we literally took steps to make sure our pension funds were not going into organizations that were attempting to isolate our cherished ally, Israel. And states should also pass laws requiring their pension fund managers to vote the state's shares in corporate board decisions rather than delegating that authority to huge Wall Street firms that are oftentimes working against citizens and shareholders and even the state's best interest. Now, President Biden ran for office promising to enact a radical climate agenda, and he's delivering on that promise. And we're experiencing the results. From early on, he put a moratorium on new oil and gas leases and did everything he could to undermine American energy independence. And now that we are reaping the inevitable consequences of his policies, his administration is trying to protect the image of backpedaling. But the truth is, they're misleading the public by pointing to a number of oil and gas permits that are approved in their administration. They're failing to mention that the government was legally obligated to approve those permits, even before the administration took office. In fact, many of these permits come from leases approved before the administration took office. In essence, President Biden wants to take credit for something he was forced to do only after complaining about it and trying to offline it for the first year and a half. The truth is, America cannot continue down this road. And 2024 is too long to wait to reverse these unconscionable energy policies that are working a hardship on American families. The stakes are too high. We need to unleash American energy now and reverse the Biden administration's energy scarcity agenda. You know, what I learned during my time in Congress is that sometimes to make them see the light, you got to have them feel the heat. And that's the reason why an advocacy group I founded called Advancing American Freedom and launched a $10 million campaign about 6 weeks ago. Advertising, television commercials, calling on Congress to unleash American energy so we can once again have American prosperity. We're asking American citizens in 20 congressional districts to call their representatives and tell them to put hardworking American families before the left's radical energy agenda. And anyone that might be looking on today, on the live stream or on any replay of this, you need to know, I have to tell you, during my 12 years in Congress, a dozen calls from your congressional district is a landslide. And if you care about American energy independence, if you care about restoring America's economy through low-cost energy, call your congressman, call your congresswoman, and tell them that we need to end the war on energy now and unleash American energy for the American people. You know, the organization I mentioned also released what we like to call the Freedom Agenda, which includes a detailed policy prescription that would restore American energy and restore it every bit as quickly as we did during our administration in those first 3 years. Our agenda calls for, among other things, expediting permits and approvals for oil and gas production, as well as pipeline construction, and expanding drilling on federal lands. You know, America has more than enough energy under our own soil to power our prosperity for generations without relying on hostile nations around the world. And we just need to get after it. Secondly, We believe that leaders should work to eliminate mandates, regulations, and special tax breaks that put a thumb on the scale for politically favored energy sources over other forms of American energy. There should be no market-distorting government subsidies for any energy source. Now, I'm an all-of-the-above energy person. And when I was in the Congress, I'm for oil and gas and coal and wind and every other form of renewables. But we ought to let the market decide. Let the American people choose the energy. And that's how we create a more prosperous America. We should also have leaders that fight policies that discriminate against technology that uses American energy, like coal and petroleum, and favor energy technology that relies on resources from foreign countries, like minerals from China or the Congo, that make batteries for electric cars, if you haven't noticed. And finally, our agenda suggests that leaders should facilitate the export of American liquefied natural gas through fast approvals of export terminals. I mean, men and women, we are the Saudi Arabia of natural gas. We are. It's what drove American energy independence during the Trump-Pence administration. And we will return to that again, but we need today to be working on the infrastructure to make it possible for us to export our energy resources to the world. We'll be able to help our friends around the world achieve energy independence from adversarial nations. We can help our friends in Europe become less reliant on Russian gas imports and impose even a higher cost on Russia for its criminal invasion of Ukraine. Now, earlier today, President Biden, I'm told, actually said that Republicans have offered plenty of blame, but not a single solution to actually bring energy prices down. Well, with all due respect, Mr. President, you just haven't been listening. I mean, we all know how to restore American energy independence, how to unleash American energy. This administration just simply needs to decide that they're going to put the interests of the American people, the interest of American families, and the interest of our prosperity and our security above the radical environmental agenda that they've been advancing. So I've offered quite a few solutions today, but let me boil it down to just a few simple words for this administration. Get out of the way. I mean, the truth of the matter is that when government gets out of the way, great things happen in America. And that's especially true in the story of American energy. You know, I was looking at the movie Giant the other day. It tells a great story, an epic story about a Texas oil catter. And one of the stars of that movie is from Marion, Indiana, James Dean. But that story was just emblematic of countless stories all across Texas and all across this country where people went out, worked hard, got their hands dirty, and they built a future, and they built it on the vast natural resources of this country. And the truth is, this administration, if they would unleash that entrepreneurial spirit in America again, we could bring energy prices down in a heartbeat. If they would just get out of the way and let America's energy producers do what they do best, and that is produce American energy for American growth. Now, with this, I'll close. And then I look forward to visiting with you before I have to slip back to the Hoosier State. But I want to thank you all for coming out and hearing me out on this important issue. As I said at the top, I thought it was important that I come to Texas to talk about energy. And I hope what I've said has been an encouragement to you, because we can turn this around and turn it around very quickly. But I want to suggest to you that this isn't just about gasoline prices. This isn't just about low-cost energy that will drive American prosperity and our future. This is really about the strength of our nation and restoring American place in the world. You know, from the founding of our country, I believe there have been three sources of American greatness: our faith in God, our freedom, and our vast natural resources. Any study of 18th, 19th century, and early 20th century political thought includes all three. was almost impossible, whatever your political party was, not to hear someone celebrating our faith in God, our freedom, and our vast natural resources. I mean, I truly do believe they are the pillars of American greatness. And so even as we cherish our religious freedom, even as we cherish all of our freedoms, so we should cherish the right of Americans to develop the God-given natural resources that have blessed this land. In the hall of Congress, on the floor of the Congress, there's only a few words etched in the walls. E pluribus unum is on the ceiling, meaning out of many one. Just above the American flag are the words, "In God we trust." But when I was a member of Congress, I also noticed there was a quote high up, right near the ceiling. A quote by that great statesman, Daniel Webster. It's chiseled into the wall of the Congress, and I think it speaks volumes about the importance of this issue in the life of our nation. Daniel Webster said, and I quote, "Let us develop the resources of our land, call forth its power, build up its institutions, promote all its great interests, and see whether we also in our day and generation may not perform something worthy to be remembered." And think about that. Let us develop the resources of our land, call forth its power, build up its institutions, promote all its great interests, and see whether we also in our day and generation may not perform something worthy to be remembered. Everything begins with developing the God-given resources of this great land. I mean, what we proved in the last administration, and President Biden could prove again, is that when we develop the resources of our land, that we tap into national strength. You know, our country was blessed with natural wealth greater than any nation on the face of the earth. And we have used it for generations to improve the lives of our people and to be a blessing to the world like no other country in history. We are, in a very real sense, a superpower of natural resources and generosity. But we've placed our great abundance under lock and key, choosing to put ourselves at the mercy of nations that don't share our values. Webster's told us to call forth its power. We do that by building the infrastructure necessary to take those vast resources to the wider world. Terminals, pipelines, restart the construction of the Keystone XL pipeline, and allow America's entrepreneurial spirit to do the rest. And Webster also said, build up its institutions. Rather than using the power of government to tear down private institutions and the entrepreneurial spirit of the American people, to tear down American energy through ESG scores, reporting requirements, soul-crushing regulations and mandates, we can do the opposite. And then and only then, I submit to you, will we do something in our generation worthy to be remembered. So, men and women of Texas, I hardly have to tell you how important energy is to the life of this nation. Texas, in the spirit of this great state, has created the energy that has driven American prosperity literally throughout the entire history of our country. And I have every confidence that this challenging season we live in today will pass, that the American people will rise up with one voice someday soon, maybe this November, and start to turn our nation back to unleashing American energy and the boundless prosperity that is the birthright of every American. So thank you very much for hearing me out. Thank you for all the great work of the Baker Institute, and God bless you all.